Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the June meeting of the Planning West Committee at Somerset Council. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the alarm sounds, would you please leave the building by the fire exits? And the meeting point is behind behind the courts at the back of this building. This meeting is being recorded and will be streamed to YouTube. Therefore, any members of the public present should be aware that they may be recorded even if they are not participating in the meeting. If this causes you any concern, can you please let me know now? Okay, and if I can remind members to tidy up after themselves at the end of the meeting, the Democratic Services would be very grateful. Okay, so Josh, do we have, I've got one apology for absence from Andy Sully, subbed by Mike Rigby. Are there any others?
That's correct, Chair. Thank you. That's all I have, although I can see Councillor Henley is currently not present as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and item 2 is the minutes from the previous meeting. Is it your will that I sign those as a true record of that meeting? Thank you. No, you have a query?
The one on the Willerton proposal, where there was another, oh gosh, forgot what they called, person you know. So we also, most of us knew one of the parish councillors who was a former district councillor. Right. That's not been noted. That was for item 5, the one on Willerton. Okay.
Can we make a note of that, please, Josh? And with that amendment, are you content that I sign them as a true record with that amendment? Okay, thank you. I shall do so. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest other than the normal ones? Start with Nick O'Donnell, please.
So I don't know if this is a normal one or not, but I am the division member for Staple Grove.
Okay. Yeah. And Dave Mansell?
Yes, similarly, but I'm a division member for Upper Tone, which is the second and third ones.
And amazingly, your colleague is here as well.
Indeed.
Right. Okay. Yes, I am indeed the member for Upper Tone, and in both 6 and 7 are within my ward. I have applied to speak on both.
Okay.
So therefore, at the end of the presentation, or before the presentation, I will take myself into the public seating. I will speak from there. When I finish speaking, I will withdraw from the meeting until recalled, and I will do the same for item 7 as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other declarations? I'm not seeing Derek.
I'm the divisional member for item 5 as well, but I don't think we do need to declare simply the divisional member doing.
No, because there is declaration from where we are. Okay, so public question time. I'm not aware of any, Josh.
That's correct, Chair. Yeah, there's no public questions raised. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to item 5, which is application number 38/25/0115, and this is for the retaining wall and at Staple Grove West, and the case officer is Simon Fox. Simon, would you like to present your report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is an application for reserve matters following an outlying consent reissued earlier this year, and it's reserve matters application for the erection of a retaining wall at the approved Staple Grove Road junction, and this is related to Staple Grove West allocation on Staple Grove Road at the north of Taunton. The history of this junction, which we'll be focusing on today, on to Staple Grove Road, serving the Staple Grove development, has had a history. And that history probably even predated the core strategy in terms of the allocation of the Staple Grove site, or the intention of housing development in that area. And at that time, it was part and parcel of a potential wider northern distributor, which would serve the Staple Grove allocation in the first instance, but then also wrap around the north of Taunton and link in the end to Nerrells. Members will recall from recent applications in at Lingford Lane that Northern Distributor Road is now not on the cards by reason of Lingford Lane and Nerrells now not connecting, and the gap in the middle between Kingston Road and Cheddon Road also not being progressed through development. So we are talking about the Staple Grove Spine Road, and we're talking about the Staple Grove Road junction to the Staple Grove allocation. So the core strategy talked about development at Staple Grove and the prospect for this road. Then that was ratified further in the site allocations management plan, which showed the Staple Grove allocation in more detail. It showed the point of access, or the intended access, which at that time was actually indicated to be off the Silk Mills roundabout. And it showed the extent of the development, green wedge, and the indicative line of the spine road, which is this blue dotted line. You can see here in this extract that at that time it was intended that the junction come off of Silk Mills roundabout and provide this northern link. When the application was submitted in around 2014, through to about 2017, the point of access had shifted from the Silk Mills roundabout to a new staggered junction, which was located here. This is the Silk Mills roundabout here, and this is the proposed. This was the proposed junction location at that time. Now, the 2014 planning application was an outline with all matters reserved except for access, and therefore the Staple Grove West application, as it became known, was effectively seeking approval for the points of access, one from Staple Grove Road, this staggered junction, one from Kingston Road, and the slightly infamous now drop down road, which was to serve construction traffic and an initial number of dwellings in the centre of the site. And this was because the site was to be phased from the centre out towards Staple Grove Road. And that just shows that junction arrangement in more detail. And that shows how East and West were going to work together. So roll forward to 2025, and earlier this year we reapproved Staple Grove West with a raft of changes to the legal agreement, and notably to the phasing. And it's the phasing which now shows the first phase now being at Staple Grove Road end, which has brought forward this issue around the delivery of the junction, which under the approved Section 106 was not to be delivered until 150 occupations. It's now going to be delivered, or it's intended to be delivered, prior to any occupations. So in 2017, when the outline application went before Planning Committee, and some of you may well have sat on that committee, this was the proposed approved plan for the junction at Staple Grove Road. So this is Silk Mills here. This is Staple Grove Road. I'll just change to the laser. This is Staple Grove Road. So Silk Mills, as you know, is a roundabout. That is going to change to signals. And then this new staggered junction, again, a signalised junction, was to be created to serve the spine road into the site. So to reiterate, the outline application was for the approval of the access arrangements, the quantum of development, and then this plan was cited in condition 2 as an approved plan. So you've got there the proposed amendments to Silk Mills Junction. And then in the legal agreement which accompanied it, it mandated the developer to provide that junction in accordance with this drawing by 150 residential occupations. So that is roughly the alignment of the spine road on the aerial photography. Now, obviously, there'd been a conversation, and those conversations, in fact, still persist amongst some people who have charted this application since it got submitted back in 2014, about why the junction did not come off the Silk Mills roundabout. And the officer's report provides some commentary for that. So that's where it may have otherwise come through. You can see that there is still a gradient issue, even if you came off of there. I'll come back to that in a moment. So where we're left is the drawing that I showed you of the approved junction. This is a cleaner version of it that hasn't been scanned and has lost lots of its definition being replicated in the Section 106 agreement. And this shows the engineering layout, but helpfully it actually shows you the topographic information underneath, which is in grey. And the stretch that we're looking at is between this pathway at Mill Rise back to this path which goes up into Nash Green. So that's where that slope comes out here. So it's the section between there and there that we're talking about. So if I zoom in on that drawing and I show you the two blue lines, which are the current curb lines of the metalled carriageway that is Staple Grove Road, you can see at an instant that we've got an expanded junction over the metalled part of the highway that currently exists. When I impose that on here, those two blue lines are those two blue lines. But when you go back to this, you can see that certainly on the south side, we've got in effect two whole extra lanes plus the re-provided cycleway footway. So when you add that width to this left-hand southern blue line, you can see in an instant that that is going to require quite significant intrusion into this verge, the narrow footway that's there, and then the planting strip which goes along the edge of the footpath. Now, the planting strip that exists is quite deep. Half of it is within the adopted highway, and half of it is within an area of public open space that was provided and transferred to the council as part of the neighbouring Nash Green Sherwell Park development. The works that I'm talking about today fit solely within the adopted highway. So whilst I am going to be talking about and have written about extensive tree loss, the tree loss is within the adopted highway, not within the POS. And that's a very important distinction. There is still a strip of trees that effectively protect and screen the houses and bungalows within Nash Green. So as I showed on the aerial photograph, the retaining wall fits largely within the area by the two paths, framed by the two paths, this one to Mill Rise and this slopey path back into Nash Green. To the west of the Mill Rise path that exists at the moment, there will be a ramp which facilitates DDA compliant ramps to make up the levels difference, because a new flight of steps has had to go in because everything's become concertinaed up. You're making a larger migration of levels from the new footway cycleway at Staple Grove Road up to the existing levels at Mill Rise. In elevation, if you like, the retaining wall is formed of two parts. The lower part is a masonry wall, which will be of natural stone. And then the upper part is a proprietary retaining wall structure, which is effectively planted bags that are stacked up to create a retaining structure that can be planted. This is a visual, or this was a visual that was produced during the course of the application. The only correction to this is, whilst steps are correct going up into Mill Rise, it doesn't show the ramp that goes out to the west, which is on the right-hand side of this photograph. This is looking out of the new Spine Road looking towards the south side. So you can see here the masonry wall, and then above this sort of darker green area is the vegetation that's planted in the rest of the retaining wall structure, these bags, which I'll show you in a moment. In cross section, effectively, this is what we have. This is a masonry section, which doesn't require, this is on a lower section, it's just the wall and then the backfill in behind. It's worth noting that in order to erect construct the retaining wall, the excavations need to be further back into the bank to create a working area. Then the wall is created and then it's backfilled. So that means that obviously everything looks much more dramatic. There's more vegetation that's required to be removed in order to actually construct the thing. You can see here the hatching is effectively the backfill. So it's going back another metre or so just to provide a working area to get that structure in place and then be backfilled and then can be planted on top. In the higher sections, like this, you can see that product, those planted bags that are sat above the wall at a steeper elevation, that you get a natural bank, which are then planted up, and then the backfill can also receive new planting on the top. So to give you some idea, this is obviously a retaining structure that's made completely of the planted bags, and then how that's then greened up over time. Here's another example of how that product works. I mean, that just looks like a hedge, but you know there are the same bag structures behind this. And the closest example that we've been provided through the applicant and the manufacturer is this example, where you have again what we're trying to achieve here, which is a lower masonry wall with that same product above. In this case, grassed, but in our case, we are trying to seek more of a hedge mix. In the case of Staple Grove, this is the type of stone that we are seeking to use. The natural stone of Staple Grove is now no longer available, and the applicants have put forward this one, which is from a quarry in Devon, but has those reddish hues which are similar to those that are found within Staple Grove Village. So where we've got to with this effectively is a large junction has been approved, and some years down the line it has been realised that a retaining wall is required. Now, the decision to go for a retaining wall is one of a lesser of two evils. You can get away without a retaining wall to the extent that we're proposing if you take out all the trees within the public open space outside of the highway land. But that is POS that's been transferred only to the council for the purposes of POS, and also exposes all. And if we removed all those trees, I think we'd have a bigger complaint from the general public, and we'd be exposing all those properties to Staple Grove Road. Whereas at the moment, the tree belt does at least provide some visual screening and some noise attenuation from the road that sits in the cutting below. So it's a case of where do you put your wall, and how high does the wall need to go in order to serve the purpose that it's got to be built for. And so this discovery that a retaining wall was required has come out of the detailed discussions that the Highway Authority have had with the developer over the last 2 years in order to grant technical approval for the junction works. And when asked, does the introduction of a retaining wall require planning consent, the answer we gave was yes, hence this planning application being submitted. The developers take a slightly different view in that they say it's part and parcel of the junction. In approving the junction, it should have been known that a retaining wall was required and therefore is approved by default. But due to legal advice that we've taken, we held out that our planning application was required, and the developers put this planning application in good faith in order to unblock the situation and move things forward. There is an intention to commence in earnest the junction works in a matter of weeks. For those who have diligently undertaken their site visits in preparation for this meeting, will have seen that some of the vegetation on the north side has already been removed as a preemptive move to facilitate that work starting in a few weeks' time. And this planning application is obviously required to fully endorse that start, if you like. So it goes back to a fundamental question which I've asked myself many times in dealing with this issue is, did we know that a retaining wall, could we have envisaged that a retaining wall was necessary when we approved the original junction? And I think the answer that I keep coming to is we must have had, because I don't know how you approve such a size of junction, which effectively takes it from 2 lanes to 5 in places, plus cycleway, without inner cutting, and not realise that that's going to have an impact on the greenery on the south side. You can see from the drawings that I've shown you that the information was there in order to draw those conclusions. And it might be that the case officer at the time and the planning committee considering it felt that that was just part and parcel of the junction works. However, obviously, roll forward 5 years or more since even the decision was issued, which was 2 years after the planning committee in 2017, and we're a lot more sensitive and reluctant to see the extent of greenery that's being removed be removed. You know, the council has declared ecological emergency, climate emergency. We have the Garden Town vision. Everything that we try and advocate through our planning decisions and our guidance and the way we go about our work is to facilitate the greening up of spaces. And this application obviously does run somewhat contrary to that. However, my only reference point is to go back to the original officer's report and pick out key extracts, which says, in principle, the signalised junction proposed by the applicants on the A358 would be acceptable in terms of policy D2. Well, policy D2 is a policy that tries to protect approach routes into Taunton and Wellington. So that to me strikes me as an acceptance that this was going to be impactful, but subject to the sort of finessing details, if you like, which I would constitute the wall as being one, then that policy could be met. And it then talks about, you know, the junction and alternatives. And it's down in this bottom corner here that it talks about the other options that were considered, namely the Silk Mills roundabout extension and the fourth arm, and the fact that this was discounted due to constraints to the south of the roundabout, and the fact that this option would require the provision of a large roundabout or a larger roundabout than exists, that in the officer's opinion at that time would be disproportionate in scale to the majority of other junctions in Taunton. So maybe it was known all along that that was required. It's just when you focus in on one issue and you have to write a report about it, of course, it's the biggest issue that you're dealing with, which is the loss of this vegetation. And when we revisit, you know, Street View imagery, that's the approach out of Taunton. That's the approach into Taunton, and obviously it's a green and pleasant environment. Somewhat now changed by reason of the works on the north side. And, you know, you can be an apologist about this, or you can say, well, this is the reality of major development in our town, that there is going to be impacts if we want to balance the delivery of housing in the town, the free flow of traffic, and this is a consequence. This is a consequence that was fully known at the outline stage. It's just the fact now that we've got this wall that we're trying to retain the south side with. This is the area where the spine road will go into the site. The work had to be done when it was done. which is probably slightly unfortunate timing for this meeting in many respects, but it was pegged by a Dormouse license expiry, so it had to be done then to fulfil Natural England requirements. As I go through here, this just shows the north side and gives us, I think, an indication as to how the south side will look for a while until the replacement greenery repairs the scars. There's also a bit of hedging down here, I think, to provide the compound for these works to take place. So looking back up, the area that we're really looking at here is on the right-hand side. I'm sort of stood roughly where one of the lanes will come down. Just to the right will be the elongated ramp to provide the DDA compliance for people to get from Staple Grove Road up into Mill Rise. But effectively, it's this run of trees on the right-hand side that will be largely removed. That's the area where the ramp's going to go. That's the north side. So this is opposite now the Spine Road access. This is where the greatest width of the new junction is, going from 2 lanes to 5. And then this is the view from within Nash Green, which I don't see changing significantly because there's still that depth of tree planting within the POS area that was planted at the time that Nash Green was developed, which will be retained. So there's no updates to my report as such. The material planning considerations to consider in this case, I don't know if reluctance is a material planning consideration, but it's certainly how I feel about this situation. I think a sequence of events have led us to this situation, and I think on assessment of all of those matters combining, it effectively has led us to the inevitable, which is we have to have a retaining wall. And my role in this planning application has been to try and achieve the best outcome possible, and that's through the aesthetics of the wall. So holding out for natural stone, which in fairness, Blore have also supported because they see it as the first entrance to their site. So they want that to look as good as possible. And with the landscaping above, I mean, you could have done it the other way and have it all masonry, but then you'd be looking at a much taller masonry wall, which we didn't think was appropriate. The more greenery we can try and factor back in, the better. The new outline did secure, a significant amount of money for active travel off-site. We're now no longer a highway capacity focused council when it comes to designing new junctions. However, I've tried to demonstrate in my report and through this presentation that this is somewhat of a legacy. I think I've said in my report this was a junction designed at a different time, just unfortunately implemented now. And I've also included in my report comments from the head of transportation about a particular bus route which could be implicated if this junction isn't free flowing. The Garden Town status since the original outline application is of interest, but maybe not so material, but it has influenced our resolve to try and get the best outcome possible. As I said, works on the junction are planned to start in earnest next month. And I think it is material, albeit you may have thought for an application for a wall, he can't lever in the 5-year housing land supply into such a presentation, but I am going to. By refusing this application, it would further undermine the 5-year housing land supply because there's 162 dwellings that are earmarked out of Staple Grove West over the next 5 years. And my estimation is that a refusal of this application would lead to somewhere in the region of a 2.5 year delay, whilst a new junction design is brought about, which tries to design out a retaining wall. And the only way we're going to design out a retaining wall is to make the junction smaller. And the Highway Authority have been absolutely adamant that a smaller junction would only ever be supported with the necessary modelling to demonstrate that traffic flows did not command the junction that we now have. Now that might feel unfortunate given where we are, but that's been their position for the last 2 years. Believe me, I've tried to advocate a smaller junction. And I think in the round, take into account the ongoing supply that Staple Grove West would provide for our 5-year land supply, and the fact that we've tried to get the best outcome possible. The recommendation, somewhat reluctantly, Mr. Chairman, is that the application be granted subject to the conditions listed at Appendix 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a string of councillors that want to speak. I have no public speakers on this application. So the councillors are, we're going to start with Gwyl and then Andy Hadley, please. So Gwyl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fox, for a very comprehensive introduction to this particular application. I think my main concern relates to the trees that are to be left. We can use the word stranded, that's probably not appropriate, but they're left on the bank above the retaining wall. Now, it looks to me as if you're going to do a fair amount of excavation in order to create the situation where you can put the wall in. If, of course, you start to compromise the roots and the support on the northern side of the trees that are there, then there is a risk that they will become less stable. And potentially, I suppose, they may have to come down in future or new ones be planted on the public open space inside. So I suppose, in a way, I'm looking for reassurance that this particular point has been addressed and that the retention of the trees at the top of the slope for aesthetic and noise baffling purposes is guaranteed to be a long-term solution and is not going to build up a problem for us in the future. I'd also like reassurance that when they were taking down the trees on the other side, that somebody did at least carry out an inspection for nesting birds, because it was done right in the heart of the season. I appreciate the problem over the dormouse license, but anyway, my main point is the trees on the south side that are going to be left, and are they going to present a problem in the future, in your view, or in anybody's view?
Yeah, well, I think it's a valid question. I think when you've got a tree group and you try and tease half of them away, what does that mean for the ones that are remaining, both in terms of their exposure to the wind, for example? They may become less stable from that reason alone. I think might sound like a bit of a cop-out. I think it comes down to the methodology of how you go about the excavations. I think there is a way of trying to safeguard and not just go in and rip everything out. I think it's got to be done carefully. It's got to be selective. It might be that you go a quarter of the way in and then try and remove those other trees within the work area carefully and try and tease them out without undermining the other ones. So I think it's something that's very difficult to police through the planning process. But obviously this will be overseen by colleagues within the Highway Authority, as it's on highway land, and the wall will obviously be an asset, I think, if you use that word, that the Highway Authority will eventually own, and therefore it's in everyone's interest that we get off onto the right foot with that. And I think all I can say to you is I think the methodology of how you go about the works will be key as to how those retained trees stand up in the long term. I think in answer to this point, which I think is an extremely valid one, maybe an informative note just to sort of maybe package that sort of advice to the applicant would be fully appropriate.
Yes, I think I'd quite like the committee's concern about the longevity on the trees on the top of the slope to be seriously considered. I see we have Mr. Fellingham, I think, from Highways here, and if you say Highways are going to be overseeing this, whether he has any views on these trees?
Yeah, I mean, as Mr. Fox has alluded to, through the process of agreeing, obviously, how this construction is going to be put forward, should members look to grant the application, we'll be working with the contractor that's going to be nominated by Bloor to make sure that it's done in the most appropriate way. So obviously they clear away what they need to, but also protect what is already there. So we can agree with them that there are certain areas that they will have to dig by hand, or other areas where they can then protect the tree roots and make sure things are put in place to make sure those trees are protected. So as you say, we don't end up in a situation in a few years' time. So, but we can take that away as part of the Office of Negotiation should members look to approve this scheme.
I think we would look to put a condition on to cover that, Gwyl. Okay, Andy Hadley, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm a little bit perplexed thankfully I wasn't on the planning committee back in 2017 when the outline planning permission was improved, but I've always been taught that we deal with the application in front of us, and to try and guess that we would need a retaining wall because it wasn't on the plan is a little bit much for the committee to have to. Can't really blame the committee because it wasn't on the plan. But that's just an aside, and blaming a poor dormouse just because we've had to start destroying his habitat is another one. But my actual point that I'm going to get to is the integrity of the bags that makes up the higher part of the wall. I can see by the pictures that you've got that they have been used on several retaining walls in the past. Can we have assurances that them bags don't degrade too quickly or too badly that any high weather event could cause a collapse from that sort of height onto the highway? And if any sort of collapse does happen, who is responsible to put that right? Would that be Bloor Homes or would it be down to the council?
Do you want?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to the first point, I was my summary of the past wasn't a criticism of the planning committee. It was a general. Did we foresee a wall was necessary or not? And I think it could have been seen that the impact of such a large junction was going to have a consequential need for the removal of vegetation, and that could have been a little bit clearer in the officer's report. So it's as much an observation of the officer's report as it was the committee being led to the decision that eventually they made. With regard to the wall structure incorporating the masonry section and the bagged section above has got permission in principle from the Highway Authority. So I'll just pass over to Mr. Fellingham to take you through that.
Yes, in terms of when we deal with these types of structures, what it goes through our structures engineers, they have to get an approval in principle in terms of what they're proposing to do. So that sets out initially what they're proposing in terms of what you've seen today, part of the planning application. That structure has got to be able to stand up to a certain period, mostly 125 years, 150 years, whatever. That has to stand up to scrutiny so it won't fail, because we have that with all our structures, and this would be a similar thing. Obviously, if there is an issue, that will then be taken up in terms of discussions with Bloor and through the Highway Authority to rectify that issue. But through the process of approving this and approving the approval in principle, and then the further construction design detail that we will get subsequently post consent, that should not be an issue because of the lifespan of what the structure will be. So our team, because they've already given the approval in principle in terms of what the detail they've been given, they're confident and satisfied that that structure is sound.
So just to come back, if there is a failure, it's down on the council, basically.
Once we've taken it, it becomes a highways asset and we would have to deal with that failure. But as I say, I'm hopeful because of the design scrutiny that we've gone through, that won't happen. But if there are issues in the future, that will be picked up by us as part of our highways asset.
It is a structure and a type of construction that is used elsewhere very successfully. So there's no reason that I can think of that it would fail just because it's in Staple Grove Road rather than somewhere else. Yeah, Simon.
Just add one point because I think it's a relevant point to make. In my report, I have talked about our aspiration to try and get a hedging mix into that bag section, and the manufacturer who has been and the provider of the structure who's been in liaison with the applicant has suggested that the hedge mix that we've proposed will work. However, a hedge is obviously a much more robust planting structure than maybe just having grass. I think in my report, I've tried to sort of leave what we don't know is it further on through the design evolution, whether that hedging mix becomes a problem. If that hedging mix becomes a problem to the integrity of the structure, we obviously will need to fall back onto the grass solution. So I've left that sort of door slightly ajar in my report because we're not quite there with the final ratification of the vegetation, but our aspiration is to try and provide a hedging mix to try and blend it back in to the existing landscape.
Mike, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Simon. I have to say that I share your lack of excitement about the proposal. and your reluctance to approve it, but I see that you feel you have no choice but to do that. I think at the heart of this is the fact that you've said you've had long conversations with the Highway Authority about the nature of this junction and its requirements. The way you described it, it sounded very much like the Highway Authority was maintaining the predict and provide approach to this that I thought we'd abandoned a couple of years ago. So that's my first question. Why do we seem still to be operating on a predict and provide basis? And I'll ask all the questions in one go, if I may. Who owns the trees on the south side? Are they entirely owned by the Highway Authority? Just looking at the plan on Google Earth, if you accept that the new road will be roughly double, if not slightly more, the width of the existing road, that looks to me to take out pretty much the entire tree belt alongside Nash Green. You might end up with one tree left, perhaps one tree's depth worth of planting compared with what's a fairly substantial belt of trees at the moment. And while you say the garden town status isn't overarching here, my worry is that we've spent quite a lot of years now, with some difficulty at times, trying to explain to Taunton residents how building on lots of the green space around Taunton makes it more gardeny. I think we've kind of got through that to a degree now by explaining there will be more green space within the developments. There'll be more green links between the new developments and the existing town. I think that's starting to be understood, although, how is it, 8 years on, it's still by far not universal, that understanding. My concern is by kind of bulldozing all the way through what is quite an attractive green entrance to Taunton, it's really difficult to explain that in the context of the fact that we've got garden town status. So who owns those trees? What rights do Blore have to remove them? I noticed that you said that they were planning to build 50 houses a year. I thought we had a housing crisis. I mean, that's a pathetic drip of progress, frankly, on a major site. I suspect that many of us can hazard a guess as to why the housing build out rate is low, but it's not really good enough. And then finally, I've been saying this for years and I'll keep saying it until it changes. We have an opportunity here with the treatment of Mill Rise. There's a cycleway and footway along the northern side of Staple Grove Road. LTN 120 came in 5 years ago now. We can't be seeing the construction of some new cycleways and footways that don't take precedence over minor side roads like that. So whether or not we can condition that through this application, and I doubt we can, I'd like to see a conversation reopened with Blore that means that when that junction is built, the cycleway and footway have precedence over the traffic, over the vehicular traffic that uses that side road, as LTN 120 expected us to do 5 years ago. So those are my questions.
Okay, so I think the fundamental premise of why we are where we are is because this was effectively approved in 2017. This was a resolution to approve by planning committee in 2017 when East and West were presented together. Obviously, West proceeded to having its legal agreement signed, and then the certificate was issued in 2019. So that preceded the early stages of the garden town concept. I don't think we were actually awarded garden town status until 2019, and the vision then came later. So effectively, this is why I tried to show the core strategy in this going back sort of 20 years or more in terms of its conception. At that time, until very recently, really, the way of designing junctions for development was under the predict and provide. You totted up how many movements development would create on a standard methodology. You would test all neighbouring junctions, and if they were shown to be over capacity, you'd make them larger. And we've done that ourselves as a council in Taunton, haven't we? With Tone Way, for example, we've used the extent of the highway land to make that road function better and take more traffic. the move now with new applications is under the vision-led planning, where we don't just build more and more capacity into roads and then wonder why the traffic grows exponentially. We try to explore other ways, other ways of moving people around through modal shift. And what that means is, and how it's been demonstrated is with the outline that was approved earlier this year, taking highway projects out of that scheme and moving the money and adding money to create substantive off-site cycle linkages. £3 million towards 2 routes within our Connecting Our Garden Communities project, which will connect Staple Grove West and the wider Staple Grove site to the train station and to the town centre, in the hope that then people can take cycling as an option rather than have to drive their car. So the Predict and Provide legacy is evident in this drawing. It's just a scheme that hasn't been built yet. It's got planning permission, it just hasn't been built. And when it is built, it will look like a scheme of its time, rather than if we were looking at this completely afresh now, as we are at Monkton Heathfield, which will demonstrate a completely different tact in terms of our approach to very large junctions. The trees on the south side are within the adopted highway. Some areas skirt closer to the POS than others, but the trees that are being felled are owned by the Highway Authority. So we obviously have grass verge, and we have the trees. So that's all owned by the Highway Authority within the adopted highway limits. Delivery of homes is an issue for us. We'd like developers to deliver them quicker. I'm not sure that's necessarily overly pertinent to this application, but I note your concern about that. It's a standard number that developers use to demonstrate delivery, and all I want to ensure is that we're delivering some houses at Staple Grove at some point in the next 2 years. Mill Rise is a particular issue that was of some discussion during when I did participate in some of the technical approval meetings that the Highway Authority ran with the developer's engineer. We have ended up with an elongated ramp and steps. Maybe could have been designed in a slightly different way, but I'll pass over to Mr. Fellingham to answer as to how we've ended up with that arrangement.
Yes, I mean, as Mr. Fox alluded to, as we've seen in front of members today, we do have one with the steps, and as he mentioned in his presentation, the reason why we've had to truncate those and necessarily over what's there because of the additional capacity that's needed. I won't reiterate what Mr. Fox said in regard to Predict and Provide and Decide and Provide. As I say, this junction was consented a while ago now, 8 years ago. It also was subject to a 106 agreement for the original outline as well. In terms of this section, as I say, from our point of view, it would have been what we would have seen as well to have a continuation of it at grade. But given the nature of how you would have to build that grade into it, that grade would have to start a lot further back, which would have come a lot further back up into Mill Rise towards the back of the properties. What we're trying to do is deliver something that is accessible for everybody to utilise within the confines of what the highway is there. So obviously we take on board what you've said, Councillor Rigby, and we can obviously have that discussion with them. But for our point of view, what's in front of you is compliant with the regulation. Our team, our engineers and design team are satisfied that it is compliant with what has been put forward. As such, from our point of view, it can be delivered to make sure that it's appropriate for all users.
You wanted to come back, Mike?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just to be clear, the Garden Town status was awarded in 2017. I seem to remember it was on New Year's Day in 2017. I think I was lying in bed with a hangover, looking at the news, trying to work out where the new Garden Town was going to be before I understood what it meant. So I think that was 2017. You did say, Mr. Fox, that you'd had long discussions with the Highway Authority about doing something different, but they wouldn't budge. That sounds like words to that effect, that you kind of expected that they should. or that there was a conversation at least to be had and that we weren't hamstrung by the previous decision. So I wonder if you could just give us a bit more information about that. Given that we now know that we own it, it's highway land, are we obliged to give over that space to the developer? I get that we've given a permission in the past, but it kind of strikes me as though they've applied for a planning permission without properly assessing the overall impact of that development, particularly the highway bit of it. So are we obliged to let them do this, given that it's our land? I'm still not clear about whether or not the cycleway and footway at the bottom of Mill Rise has primacy, so I'd still like clarification on that. And then finally, that work had better not be starting in a couple of weeks, as I've spoken to Streetworks, said absolutely no way is that to happen while Silk Mills is closed, so that will push this back until at least September or October.
So I think the point I was driving at with the Garden Town stuff is it wasn't referenced in the officer's report when the applications were considered. It may have been awarded, but I think the vision was not adopted until 2019. So this was running in parallel. But that's not to say that it wasn't a thing in the background. I mean, obviously, it didn't just happen. People were applying for it and thinking it would happen. And my understanding is that we only got Garden Town status on the basis that we could demonstrate that we were delivering transformational housing growth. So in a way, if we hadn't approved Staple Grove, Cometro, and bits of Monkton Heathfield, we probably wouldn't have got Garden Town status. So that all feels a bit sort of back to front, doesn't it, really? We would have rather got Garden Town status and then used the influence of that to influence better outcomes. But in fact, we've ended up with effectively 1990 outcomes under the premise of a Garden Town vision. And that's been, as you know, the thing I've had to wrestle with for the last 4 years, trying to demonstrate to people about seemingly making decisions under current policy. Actually, we are hamstrung by decisions and policy from 20 years ago plus. That's the tension. And that's what I say to anyone who asks me about how the Garden Town status influences things. Once we're on a clean slate and we're approving new things that haven't got a legacy, absolutely the full weight of the Garden Town vision will be applied. And I hope to be able to present you something like that very soon, because you know it's becoming a little bit tiresome having to present things from 20 years ago that people don't like the outcomes from, if I'm completely honest. So I think that's that. Are we obliged to pass over highway land? I'd say we probably are, yes. The applications have been made incorporating access. We've approved that. As far as I know, the requisite notices were served at the outline stage. Whether you could obstruct that, I don't know. Maybe Mr. Fellingham has more knowledge of that, but from my point of view, I think it would be slightly curt to use that as your obstruction when we've willingly approved the junction application in the first place.
On that, Simon, Chair. So the original red line incorporated as much of the land that is now covered by this secondary application.
Yes, it did. I think it was envisaged that there was always going to be a working area around the junction. And yeah, it's just the fact that we've now ended up this wall, which has prompted this planning application. I think if we'd taken a different legal view, it might have been that the junction would just carry on and the wall would just been part and parcel of it, as it sort of is. The thing that I can't quite sort of understand is why it wasn't annotated on the drawing. You know, I think if you've gone to the extent of drawing it over a topographical base, you must know there's a difference in levels, and that difference in levels is only going to be made up by a wall or a slope. But either way, vegetation is needing to be removed to facilitate either of those two options. And like I say, we've just tried to get in a natural stone wall, which I think when you look at the rest of the Staple Grove Road corridor heading back in towards town, you know, these sort of heights of natural stone wall are more common as you transition from the more rural area into the more urban area. And whilst I, you know, try to make no secret of it, that this will look particularly devastated for a period of time, greenery is a great healer, and it will repair those scars in you know not too long. And what we will end up with is a different a different corridor from obviously that exists or it did exist, we'll end up with a new context, and it will be the new context that everyone then gets more familiar with, and we won't remember what went before. And trying to get more planting in, into these backfilled areas will mean that we are putting trees back into the situation, and there are obviously new trees on the other side and throughout the Staple Grove development. I'll note your point about the works starting. Thankfully, that isn't a decision I have to make, but that's what I was told. So the cycleway. So I mean, we are hamstrung by the general arrangement drawing that was approved at the outline stage. Having said that, I think there could have been more room for manoeuvre over some aspects, notably the main cycle crossing across Staple Grove Road, which is shown as a traditional corralled, pedestrian guarded cycleway, which I think could have been different. It could have reflected the cycle crossing that we now have at Toneway, where you have the continuous route across. So, my role is to try and, get the best out of it that we possibly can. And, I am an advocate for cycling, and that was one thing that I did advocate for, but you can see by the drawing that I didn't succeed.
Thank you, Chair. Very finally then, given that we now have the luxury of 3 months because they can't start until Silk Mills is finished, can we just have that conversation with the developer? I mean, all we're talking about is a very, very minor change in curb line and some different coloured tarmac at the junction of Mill Rise. I mean, we can't 5 years beyond LTN 20 keep building this crap. We've got to move on. And there's an opportunity here, and I get that you might not be able to condition it or through this process here today, but can we not just have the conversation with them and say, look, you've got a bit of time, can you just go and redesign that? It's 2 days work for a technician.
I'm very happy to have that conversation again. I think perhaps that needs to be directed to Mr. Fellingham, who's obviously been overseeing the technical approval process, and that technical approval has been granted by the Highway Authority. So happy to facilitate that, but I think maybe John has a view on that.
So whether you have a view on that, Mr. Fellingham, but it would certainly be welcomed, I think.
I think, as I said earlier, we have something that is acceptable and workable, but as you say, Councillor Rigby, is that something that you would want to see? Now, I'm happy to take what the members of the general consensus is away and have that conversation with Mr. Fox. Just for a point of clarification, I'll work with my colleagues who are approving this through our technical process, that this is something that we'd want to look at and see if there is room and scope to provide something that's better and more in line and in kin with what we want to do. I think just coming back to one of the other questions you mentioned, just so I'll cover it off, Chair. In relation to whether we would allow the works to continue on the highway, we would, because obviously they would have a suitable legal agreement in place to carry out the works, which will allow them to work on the highway. And obviously, as Mr. Fox alluded to, in the original outline application, that all of the appropriate certification would have been in place and served notice on us. As such, we wouldn't be able to prohibit them from doing those works on the highway. Obviously, as you well know, they have to undertake technical approvals before they can undertake those works. So any works that do occur on the network will have been technically approved first through our process of making sure it's suitable and safe and appropriate before we go anywhere near the highway.
Okay, I've still got 5 councillors who want to speak, so we need to crack on. Carol Ellis, please.
Thank you. I think if this does go, sorry.
That's a surprise.
Okay, sorry. What was I going to say? Yeah, I think if this goes through today, it will be, everyone feels the same as you, Simon, in terms of the reluctance, because it is, I grew up in Taunton, and you've got this sort of, the iconic approach with the tall trees and stuff, and it's something that's you associate with Taunton, and the landscape will change and it will look horrible for a considerable time. So we are between a rock and a hard place, and this was all agreed in principle in 2017 when I wasn't a councillor. So it's a bit weird. And it's also weird. I think everyone's taken aback the lack of public sort of interest or outcry. Town councillors supported this, so it just feels really weird that we might have to approve something that is like, really, oh my days. but you've explained some of the background to that. I'll try not to repeat anything that's already been said. One point that occurred to me, so if the trees that are coming down on the south side, on highway land, they're highway trees, isn't Somerset Council's policy that we do a 3-for-1 replacement? The trees that are going in elsewhere, that's the developer, right? That's not us. If our trees are coming down, there's a 3-for-1 policy, which I would expect to be fully adhered to. And then connecting back to the issue about the trees on the public open space, if some of them are going to get sort of compromised, I think we need to think, where are these trees going to go? The 3-for-1, that seems non-negotiable to me. If they're our trees and they're coming down, we have to have 3-for-1, and we have to have absolute transparency about where we're doing the 3 extra ones, and they need to be proper native species, as many of them that could maybe help. If there's, I don't know the public space that well. It's not my patch, but I don't know the public space, so I don't know if that could do with some more native species or some extra. I don't know, but to me, am I right in thinking that's a given, that if they're our trees, no matter who takes them down, we have a 3-for-1 policy? So we need some clarity on that, I think. On the issue of timing, yeah, I mean, I don't know whether Mr. Fleming was responding to Mike's point about that, but as the member for Bishop's Hull and Taunton West, Bishop's Hull is going through a hellish period because of the works on Silt Mills. I would not underestimate the level of disruption that has caused. And together with the works at the obviously Junction 26, Taunton cannot cope with any more major roadworks until at least the Silt Mills thing is over. This is really, really serious. I don't know what the technical this and technical that. This is the reality. To keep Taunton moving and avoid gridlock and put people out, not impose any extra unnecessary misery on people, you absolutely have to wait until the Silt Mills works is complete in September. Please, for the love of God, because people cannot cope with any more right now. So those are just a few points. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I might have to come back because I'll probably think of something else in a minute.
Thank you. And for the avoidance of doubt, the 5 speakers that I've still got is starting with Rosemary, followed by Dave Mansell, and then Stephen Pugsley and Norman Cabell. They're the order in which I spotted the hands going up, the indication. So Rosemary.
Yeah, I understand that this has been called an iconic approach to Taunton, but it's the one we have to make. And will that be borne in mind when the work is being done? Will they condition the work so that we on the west side can actually get into Taunton? Because it's getting more and more difficult to get into Taunton. It put half an hour on my day today, at least. And we have the buses been taken into account with all this work, because it says in the report that it will impact on the bus timetable. So how are we going to condition that as well? Because if it's got to be done, let's have it done so we can get through while it's being done.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll come back on a couple of the points. In terms of scheduling the works on the highway, Councillor Rigby has had a conversation with the Service Director, Michael Dow-Jones, and that is fully taking on board that. We're fully aware of the number of works that are on the highway network at the present time, and that will be managed accordingly. From this point of view, it's likely that this will have to wait until the Wales and West works have been completed. So obviously, for our point of view, we're fully aware of the situation, and we are obviously at the approach that, as you rightly say, we've got other works that have happened, and we're monitoring the situation through our traffic management team. So obviously, if we need to have an intervention, we will look to have that conversation with the contractors and others to make sure that we can minimise the disruption as much as we can to the residents. We completely sympathise in terms of what you're saying in terms of traffic and times and journey times, etc. And we do sympathise with that. In relation to the question of the actual when we get there for the construction of these highway works, process dictates that they will come and have a conversation with us before they start with a pre-commencement programme. we will work through that programme with them in terms of traffic management and how they can make sure through this process they can minimise this disruption as much as they can, but so that we can make sure that the traffic is maintained and free flowing as much as we can through the works as they take place. That is obviously will be bore out over time once we've considered and we're looking to get closer for them to do the delivery of the works, but we are fully aware as officers that we need to make sure that we try and keep disruption on the network to a minimum as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker on my list is Dave Mansell, please. Dave.
Thank you. I would like to reinforce a few points, but I'll do it quickly. And one is regarding the congestion from the other side. It looks like the points hit home. I'm getting complaints in Wiveliscombe that people are running into daily congestion because of the work at Silk Mills. It's unthinkable that other major roadworks could be allowed in the same place. It's already causing problems. They can't be added to, but it looks like hopefully that message is getting home. On the application, now I do understand this is about the retaining wall and the regrettable impact it has along the land alongside with the loss of trees and habitat. However, I do wish to mostly comment on the road and the decisions taken 2017, 19, 2019 and since then. And I can't help but feel, again, like others and officers too, really disappointed with what we've ended up before us in terms of what's happening with the road, which I understand is not actually part of this application. It's about the wall, but you can't help but comment on it. And I think there are important points that do need to be made. Now, I would say, Simon, well done. You clearly tried hard, and that's noted. And thank you for your report, and thank you for your efforts. I do, though, however, wish to reinforce some points made by Councillor Rigby regarding the design of what we've got here, and sort of my looking at it. Admittedly, absolutely as a layman, someone who goes past quite occasionally these days, but much more commonly in the past. Just looking at the junction's been designed because it's got to have the forecast capacity, the old way of doing things, which we should have moved on from, and it's resulted in all these lanes at the junction. But if you just go a short way from that junction, there's less lanes again. So you're going past this point and you can get through there just to get to a point where you're going to get blocked and a pinch point. Now, how sensible is that? It looks obvious to me, and it looks obvious because there's congestion at those pinch points already now. So we're talking about the Silk Mills roundabout, the Cross Keys roundabout, which are just a short stretch down there, they're even on the drawings. I think both of them on the drawings. So they're really close to, and they get congested at peak times already now. And now this is going to add 1,500 homes and all their vehicles to those junctions. Admittedly, not everyone's been going out of Taunton, but some will be. It's going to add to the traffic, the problems and there's real problems now. So it's going to get much worse. So to think that no one's been willing to move and do something to address that, I find very disappointing, and I don't understand what the cycle routes through are. Clearly there are some. I do notice that the drawing's full of advanced cycle stop lanes, which I think are great for traffic lights. I have to admit, I'm rather doubtful about how good they are for roundabouts. I have a nasty feeling cyclists who are brave enough to use them are going to find themselves running into conflict with the vehicles. I'm not sure. That doesn't look like a great solution to me. In fact, it's a recipe, as I say, to me, it looks like a recipe for conflict. It should not be the way of doing things. And here also, we've got one of these enclosed cycle things. What are we thinking of? And what is the developer thinking of? Being willing to do a scheme like that in this day and age. They should also have some concern about what they're building. So there do look to be problems here, and really disappointing that no one has been willing to look at those and try and get some improvements even at this late stage. Let's hope there still is something that can be done. And I feel something really has to be done. Now, ideally it will happen with the developer, and I think Mike's given a really good lead and suggestions on that. So I'm another voice from this committee absolutely supporting that and saying, please try and do what you can in the period that is now available to improve things. The other bit I would say is, if there can't be significant improvement, I think something else will need to be done by this council, probably from the planning authority. It can't be part of this decision. I do understand that, but the council has still funds for infrastructure, and this looks like one of the strongest cases I've seen where development is occurring without the right infrastructure, and more infrastructure is needed, especially to allow the buses to get through this point, because they already get stuck. We hear about it all the time, of the 28 getting delayed, and the other thing, allowing cyclists through as well, because it looks an absolute nightmare at the moment. And I think probably both of them just need to be designed to get away from this junction if they can, because it just looks like bad news. All right, thank you.
Did you want to come back on that, Mr. Birmingham?
Thank you, Chair. I understand the frustration of the room, and as I say, and not to sound as though repeating myself, the scheme is of its time. We understand that and we recognise that. It was led from Predict and Provide. We are in a different thing, but this scheme has got an outline planning consent and it is part of a 106 agreement already. We have had those discussions with the developer in the past, and there was a reluctance from them to revisit this. Now, for them to undertake the appropriate modelling to redo this junction in full would take a considerable amount of time. It would. From experience of them having to redo this junction, it would take a considerable amount of time. The design itself incorporates not only the access junction, but upgrades to the Silk Mills junction, but also to the Cross Keys junction. That is not only to facilitate development traffic, but also the free flow of traffic through the existing road network. You've mentioned the 28 bus service. Part of that work is that making sure we can free up some capacity so that bus service can have free flowing, because we are aware that that bus service needs to be able to move quickly and efficiently through the system. So for our point of view, we understand what you're saying, but the schema has consent. We've tried as best we can to implement and put some LTM 120 compliance elements through the junction, which we have tried to do, as retrofit as much as we can do in relation to this. Obviously, as Mr. Fox has alluded to, we hope that we'll be bringing in front of you some schemes soon that show that movement and that progression. This is obviously of its time, but as we've said, as part of this application, we're only looking at the retaining structure and not necessarily this junction. I understand the concerns, I take those on board, but obviously for the members, it is a case of the suitability of the retaining structure, which, as I've said, from a highways point of view, has got the approval in principle and is considered to be suitable.
Okay, Stephen Pugsley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is an important and interesting application, and a number of important and interesting points have been raised about it this afternoon. I've profited from listening to the discussion. However, I don't believe I've heard anything that gives us any planning grounds to do anything other than accept the recommendations that have been put before us on pages 32 and 33 of the report, subject to the conditions on pages 33 and 34. And so with that in mind, I am going to move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that's been done yet. So I will move the recommendation. I think we should be alive to the considerable efforts that are being made by the officers. I'm very mindful of what Mr. Birmingham has just said. I'm very interested in the points that Councillor Rigby and Councillor Mansell and others have made, but nevertheless, as I say, I don't think we have really any grounds for doing anything other than accepting the recommendation, and I will move it.
Thank you for that proposal. I've still got one more speaker. Oh, sorry.
Just at the point, there was a proposal by Councillor Wren to either add a note or a condition about the detailing of the retention of the trees. I don't know if Councillor Pugsley's recommendation included that.
I'm happy to add that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was going to come back on that before we sort a seconder, but hang on a second. I've got Norman Cavill that wants to speak, and I'll bring you in after that, Nick. Okay, Norman.
As you'd expect, many of the points I wanted to make have been made already, Mr. Chairman. But really, I find it quite fascinating. We've got a scheme here, I think, that an incredible amount of time and effort has been put in to make it as good as it can be. And all I would say is, with a considerable lifetime's experience of planting and growing things, I think what is being provided here will be a huge asset to that area and that part of the town in 3 years' time when it's got growth back on it again. And it will be something like 3 years when you'll start to notice the difference again. The only other comment I'd like to make, other than to second this motion, Mr. Chairman, is to back up and further LN 120's comments. As a cyclist, I'm concerned that we've got some that are, some that aren't, and it can make it a bit of a hazard for some cyclists. So whilst trying to get it done on this junction would be great, I think this council needs to take an issue with LN 120 and see whether we can start making a blanket movement to make cycling safer for people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Couldn't agree more, Norman. John, you can take those boards on board.
Yes.
That's the answer I wanted. So that's good enough for me. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Caroline and Habib, followed by, well, we'll stop there, I think. Caroline?
Yeah.
Oh, and Nick. Sorry, Nick. I almost forgot you. I wrote you down. But... Oh, and you want to pop as well. All right. Okay. Okay. Caro, Habib, Nick, and Derek.
Yeah, nobody referred to my point about the trees. So if our trees, we are the highway authority. If our trees are coming down, I'm expecting a 3-for-1, and I'm expecting to be told exactly where. What a great scheme that is going to be coming forward for replacing 3 times as many amazing native species. This would affect how I vote. So I would like someone to answer.
Yeah, well, can we unpack that? Because it's not a planning policy as far as I'm aware. So I don't know if this is a council philosophy that, you know, if you're felling trees, or if we're felling trees as a council in our management of highway or public open space, that's our policy that we, but I mean, to be absolutely frank with you, we have not attributed that policy, if you like, to this case. It's not a planning policy. If it's something that is a prerequisite of us facilitating the use of our highway land, then that's probably a separate discussion with the developer as to whether they could make a contribution to tree planting off site somewhere. There aren't trees that are going to be planted anyway, I think, as you made the point before. So, you know, it's not a planning policy that we roll out. So it hasn't been applied. But I don't know if John has more experience of this from a highway perspective.
I'm hoping that I can help. I will admit, though, that I'm not 100% sure, so it will need to be checked. But I'm fairly confident that the policy that Caroline's referring to, I think originally it was an open space policy, but I'm pretty certain it was put into the Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan, which Somerset West and Taunton agreed, and which I understand should still be in place. So I believe that's the place to look.
I have a similar memory to you on that. What I don't know is whether it did transfer over to the unitary authority. I believe it should have done, but I do not know for certain that it has done. I simply don't know the answer. So that's where we are at right now. So the people on my list next are Councillor Farber-High, please, Nick O'Donnell, and then Derek Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Simon, for your presentation. In terms of, I mean, the wall looks really sharp, and what I was actually looking at in terms of hedge mix if I may suggest that some ground covering species such as Cotyneaster or Ceanothus, which will have flower at the same time as foliage, and some of these are evergreen as well. And as well as having a sort of indigenous or native trees, may I suggest a few Caucasian oak trees to just break that coloring a little bit. It just makes it more attractive during the autumn time. It's just a recommendation that you might like to add to the team. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So it's Nick O'Donnell, then Derek.
Thank you, Chair. I just really kind of like to, well, I do have a question, but thank you for presenting this report and thank you for all the information you've given. I am a little disappointed. I feel this is a completely over-engineered junction, especially as the traffic flow has changed. That is no longer, the Northern Link is no longer there. I also noticed in the report that the traffic flows were done in 2017. Can't remember when Trenchard Way was opened. One thing I'd like to pass on to highways is that I'm worried now, of course, that people coming in from Cross Keys will see this junction. It's almost like a mini toneway into a leafy suburb as the main route into Taunton. And it will quickly narrow down into Greenway Road and Staple Grove Road and pile up. Whereas I do like to think that people see Silt Mills, that's a good route to come in Crossways. And I'm wondering if direction of traffic is going. But my question is, I've been staring at this picture all afternoon and I see one pedestrian crossing and I'm thinking where the pedestrians go after that. It's because there's a main road going up there and we haven't got plans. I mean, I know the plans are all on the retaining wall, but I just wanted to ask where the next pedestrian crossing is.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Fellingham, and I do want to bring this item to a close. So I've still got a number of speakers. So I've got Derek, Stephen Pugsley, and then Gwyl, and I'm going to call it halt at that point. So, Mr. Fellingham, are you able to answer on the question of crossings, public crossing?
I think Mr. Fox has been kind enough to put up a plan that shows where the crossing points are going to be. So to the north is going to be the main access route into the development. So you'll be able to come down there. There's the crossing across the northern element of the arm. And then it comes to that crossing point that it comes across onto that arm there, as Mr. Fox is alluding to there. So all of this will be compliant with the regulations rule and then cross over onto the arm there that they're able to move certainly around towards Silt Mills alternatively, or they can go the other way across. But they will be crossing the Spine Road effectively along that section there, as alluded with the cursor that Mr. Fox has got there, if he just moves it just to where the crossing points are there. So they will be crossing the principal route through there and then going up and through, and then the Spine Road goes up. There will be a cycle infrastructure on that side of the road going up into the development. The next pedestrian crossing will be further up into the development. It will be a lot further because we're dealing with the gradients and visibility, but there will be crossing points throughout that development and different nodal areas that we're working in terms of making something that is workable for all users as they go through.
One of the divisional members, along with Nick, I was concerned initially that this was an over-engineered solution. Although I have to say, the more the detail has become clear and explained, I'm not actually as sure as I was before that it is over-engineered for a variety of reasons, which are quite technical. And it may be that this is simply the least worst option, which has been made considerably better by way of the results that Simon's been able to achieve for us in terms of the landscaping and the nature of the wall and so on and so forth. So I'll say a little more about that, and I will be supporting it because I think it's a necessary step ultimately. I am, however, unashamedly going to use this platform and just pass a comment again about what will happen when the roadworks are being done. Because unfortunately, as I think we all know, it's been alluded to already, when significant roadworks are done in this town, all too often we see entirely predictable negative consequences, which could either have been avoided, would be too strong a phrase, but mitigated with some predictable with some common sense and creativity, perhaps. It is obvious what's going to happen here in general terms when the roadworks happen. There is going to be a big disruption in flow. However, coming in from the west, going down to Silk Mills and along Bindon Road provides an alternative route which would significantly lessen the flow of traffic through this site. The problem with Bindon Road is you get to a point where there are a few cars parked on there which slow everything down. We know something's been done temporarily for that. And then when you get to the junction with Staple Grove Road near Taunton School, because the priority is continuation of traffic up Staple Grove Road, everybody has to stop there. I'm sure it will be said by somebody that it's not as simple as it sounds to reprioritize that junction temporarily, to reshape it temporarily. If you think about how long these works are going to last and how much disruption they're going to cause, some really practical, simple, common sense steps on Bindon Road could free up flow of traffic that wants to come into Taunton down Staple Grove Road and, of course, along Trenchard Way, which wasn't there back when this was envisaged in the first place. Really, really like that to happen and not end up in a situation with this huge disruption. And after the event, we're left saying, oh, we'll think about what we could do next time. We always seem to be in that situation, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that. And the last two speakers on this are Stephen Pugsley, followed by Will Wren, and then I'm going to go to a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to
We
say
have
again,
one meeting, please.
that this really is an application for the retaining wall and its planting. It is very interesting to have a discussion about the junction and so forth. However, that isn't, I think, what we're really being asked about this afternoon. The thing I just wanted to pick up was what Councillor Farber had been saying about the planting. I think it is very helpful to have suggestions about the planting. I think we've got reassurance from the conditions 3 and 4 particularly about how the planting schemes have to be approved by this authority. And I'm sure the planning officers have been hearing some of the comments from members about what should be planted, and also that they've got the protection of being within 5 years. If something fails, then it will have to be replaced. So I think that is very important and something for us to be very mindful of as we move towards the vote on this application.
Well,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I remember when the houses at Ash Rise were built, and people used to criticise the entrance of Taunton as if it was coming into a prison, and actually things have settled down and it's taken as normal. So I have a feeling that this approach to Taunton, so I have a feeling this will settle down in due course. On the question of the trees, then Somerset Wood, I think we'll be more than happy to accommodate the extra tree planting if that's required. The main point I wanted to make was it is clear from the discussion today that members of this committee feel that there are one or two things left hanging in relation to this development. Now, I take Councillor Pugsley's view that actually it's the wall, it's the wall, it's the wall. The only alternative to us in going to a vote and passing it would be to potentially delegate it to the officers to go back and make further negotiations. That's the only, and I'm not, I have to say, I'm not entirely sure whether that's a good idea or not. So the question before us is, are we going to go with it as it is now, or do we try and make it any better if we can? I'm not sure we can, and I will leave it at that point for your discretion to
okay, thank you.
Comment
Thank
on.
you for that, Will. And I will comment. I think it's abundantly clear to the officers, both our planning officers and our highways officers, that this committee would like to see a much improved scheme at any and each and every opportunity for all the reasons that have been clearly articulated this afternoon. I don't doubt that they are taking away a number of those ideas and suggestions, and we'll be quite happy to talk to the councillors outside of this meeting to firm up some of those suggestions. So I'm quite happy about that. Mr. Fox, was there anything you wanted to bring in before we go to the vote, please?
Just to tie up Councillor Pugsley's last comment with Councillor Farber-High's comment, the species that we're aiming towards is hazel, hawthorn, holly, wild privet and Gelder rose, which is a good native mix, which we think are also appropriate for the planting bags as well. So that's just to give you some indication that there has been some thought into the planting. I have given some thought to the types of species that we would be advocating in that mix. Thank you.
Okay. Right.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, I'm happy to second, reluctantly. Oh, you already got a seconder. All right, I missed that. Okay.
Norman's already
I'll pass
seconded.
on that, but I wonder
Okay.
then if we, rather than just voting on it, could we perhaps have a second report to a future meeting showing how the points that I think Gwyl, Caroline, Derek and I have made have been addressed? So the 3 for 1 planting. I forgot what was the point that Gwyl made, and I've forgotten Derek's as well now. And the point about, it was very good. It was amazing, but I've forgotten what it was.
The thing of the changing the junction, end of Bindon Road.
And the about changing the priority on Bindon Road during the works, and then mine's about the mill rise thing. I want to see that there's been a genuine conversation about that.
I
with
don't
that-
doubt that we can have a report back that there's been a genuine conversation about it. What I don't think we can do is insist that those things happen with the result that satisfies 4 or 5 members of this committee. So conditions, we are going to, are the committee happy for the chair to work with the officers to get those conditions tidied up and firmed up?
Yep.
So we don't have to bring it back again for another session. Yeah. I'm not seeing any dissent on that, so we can, Simon? Okay, so we'll come back and do a session, you and I, with it later. Okay, it has been proposed by Stephen Poston and seconded by Norman Cavell. Can I see those in favour of approving this, please? That's unanimous. Oh, sorry, David, I'm so sorry. Are you voting against it or abstaining? You're going to abstain. Okay, that's clearly passed. On the abstentions, you think there's
One abstention, isn't there?
It's one abstention. I saw. No.
Just Dave.
It was just Dave myself. Yeah.
So it's only David abstained, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You voted for it, didn't you, Nick?
Abstain.
So no, you abstained. Nick, you voted for it. Yeah. I wanted to make sure because there was a. Yes, that's what I meant. Okay, we're in agreement. Okay, I'm going to call a 10-minute break now because I think we've been round the houses on that one. So back here at 22, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to recommence. Make sure everybody's here. Okay, everybody's here. Councillor Wren has relocated to the public speakers because he's a public speaker on this. He's doing what we call wearing his public hat. So we're moving on, recommencing the meeting. And we're moving on to agenda item 6 on our papers, which is application number 23/25/004/A. And this is for the display of 2 non-illuminated advertisement sponsorship signs on the Mill Race roundabouts and the B3227/255 at Milverton. The presenting officer is Denise Todd. So without any further ado, Denise, if you'd like to present your report.
Thank you, Chairman. Joss has just sorted me out with my presentation.
Excellent.
We go. Thank you, Chairman. This application is before committee as the views of the Parish Council and the Divisional Ward Member are contrary to the case officer's recommendation, and the Chairman has agreed that the Planning Committee will consider the application. Here we have the location and you can see the proposed signage. Sorry, here we have the application of the proposed signage. As an application for advertisement consent, the only matters for consideration in the terms of planning is the assessment of the amenity area surrounding the application site, together with any potential impact on public health and safety. The proposed signs are considered to be modest in size. They are non-illuminated. They do not flash. They will have the Somerset Council logo and the business logo of the sponsor. The signs are therefore considered to accord with policy D3 of the Site Allocations and Development Management Plan in terms of visual impact. In terms of public health and safety, the Highways Authority have stated they have no objection. Planning history shows an application for 3 signs was withdrawn in November 2022, and this application has been reduced to 2 signs. So this is what we mean by modest. The signs were approximately a metre by half a metre and stand 260 metres above the ground. As previously said, they are non-illuminated, non-flashing, are not considered to create visual clutter when viewed with the existing signage, and Highways have no objection to the proposed signage. So here we have a couple of views of the roundabout when approaching from Taunton, and again when approaching from Witherliscombe. And here we have the material planning considerations that we're able to assess with the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. The only public speaker I've got listed today is the local divisional member, Councillor Gwilrand. Will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for agreeing to bring this to committee. I'm the local member for Milverton and have represented the community on local council since 2011. In that year, I helped set up the UCAN Milverton Conservation Volunteers, and we've carried out many tasks in the area, including the road verge opposite the roundabout in question. I therefore have a good knowledge of the local environment and its flora and fauna. It is clear to me that introducing 1 metre by half metre signs on posts 1.3 metres above the ground, set in concrete on this rural roundabout, would cause a significant visual intrusion. In response to the officer's report, responding to the Parish Council failed to address the issues raised, in my view, in terms of highway safety and the ecological impact on wildflowers and the visual impact in the area. It is a high landscape value area according to the local plan. My objection related to the visual impact of large signs which are normally designated for urban curbed traffic islands on a rural roundabout, and these would be placed within a high landscape value area. The officer in her response misunderstood my reference to islands, but they are mentioned, and you saw that they were in the plan that was here. The ecological impact would hit species such as bee orchid, southern marsh orchid, oxeye daisy and fleabane, to name but a few. In terms of road safety, it's clear from the submitted comments that the road safety team does consider signs on roundabouts to be hazardous, but then makes a statement that they've been basically overruled by political considerations. Road safety is a relevant planning matter to this and many other things. As this is an apolitical committee, I ask that that aspect be given fuller consideration than in the officer's report. This roundabout does have a history of accidents, especially travelling east from Witherliscombe. I'll refer to that in a moment. The report also refers to placemaking principles, and I would ask how this application meets number 4, creating an attractive high-quality environment, number 7, enhancing accessibility and attractiveness through material street furniture and fixtures, or number 9, provide safe connectivity within rural communities. I think it fails on all of those. The report references NPPF Chapter 12, Para 135, which says developments must be sympathetic to the local character, including the landscape setting. Para 141 states that the quality and character of places can suffer when advertisements are poorly cited and designed. Adverts should be subject to control only in the interests of amenity and public safety, taking account of cumulative impacts. Under the material planning considerations 11.1, the officer quotes the application as 2 roundabout sponsorship signs to replace the expired signs to update council branding. There are no signs currently on this roundabout, so these will be new. It should also be noted that the photograph included in the planning application on the portal was not of the roundabout in question, and you've seen that, and Chairman was kind enough to circulate some photographs yesterday. In respect of the approach to the roundabout, but from both directions, you will see that the road curves slightly to the left, and so the signs will only appear late on the approach. You will also see that they're supposed to be opposite the splitter islands. In actual fact, because there are roundabout signs on there, they have been offset, and in one of the sites there's already a boulder on the roundabout which has been placed to stop traffic careering across the roundabout into the stream on the far side. Thank you for your indulgence.
Okay, thank you.
I will now
Thank you very much.
depart the
Rob.
scene.
We will invite you to return shortly. Okay, many thanks. The first councillor to catch my eye is Councillor Rigby.
Thanks. I wonder if our officer could just clarify the height above ground. I didn't quite catch that. Brilliant. I misheard that initially. It's 260 metres, and I was thinking that's quite big. That. Thanks.
Okay, Dave Mansell, please, then Caro Ellis.
Okay, thank you. As mentioned, I mean, I've obviously, as I'm required to do, I come to this with an open mind, and have noted the report, officer comments, what Councillor Enns had to say. From my perspective and the way I see it at the moment, I don't feel happy with this. And you've gathered, I am local member as well. My patch has tended to be Riverliscombe, but does now include Milverton too. So it is a roundabout I know very well. I think road safety is an issue, but I would say the biggest is the amenity aspect. Grill did mention conservation work done in this area, including round the roundabout. I'm aware of that. It's often referred to. People look after the green space there for its habitat value, and that is something that's done, and including the roundabout itself. The other aspect is the appearance. It's a rural area. I will admit I'm not that inclined to approve of advertising on roundabouts nearly wherever, but we are in a rural area here. I don't think it's right to wanting to be put adverts all over the place. I think any contribution to the council is absolutely minimal, and we've already gathered that the parish council is happy to offset that, but I suspect that any financial benefit to the council would end up being really minimal in any case. So I do feel inclined not to support this, and possibly it's premature, but I would like to propose that we refuse it. And I think the policies that allow us to do that are, they've mentioned in the report. D3 is about the appearance of the siting of advertising, and the National Planning Policy Framework, now 141, covers similar things about the interests of amenity. So amenity, I would say, is the biggest issue, which gives, in my view, grounds for us to refuse this, and I would like to propose that at the appropriate point.
Okay, I'm happy to ask the other councillors to speak, other councillors that may wish to speak on this, and then we'll come back to that if you're amenable to that, David. Okay, so Caro, you're next.
Thank you. I'll be very willing to second you in that, Councillor Mansell, at the appropriate juncture in the proceedings. Yeah, I mean, I looked at this, and you might think, oh, it's a little thing, isn't it? And for one thing, I'm just thinking, why? What is the point? Why would Somerset Council go to all these lengths to have these piddly little signs up? I mean, what is that about? That just seems slightly mad to me. And then I looked at the application form. It says, have you consulted the local community about the proposal? And the answer is no. So already you've got my backup there, because it's like, you know, it's you know, somebody's patched this, it's some local community. And as Dave has outlined, it actually means something to local people who are very invested in it. And I just think in principle, it's not okay for a big council to make decisions, whether they're big or whether they're little, affecting specific localities and just not bother asking and just sort of say, you know, oh, well, it'll go through planning or whatever. So the parish council wants to maintain the roundabout sound at its own cost. And it sounds like there's already that local posse who have been looking after it. I do think the visual amenity is a key, maybe the key planning factor. There's also the sort of the loss of habitats and biodiversity, and it could be also harmful in a road safety sense. So, you know, I just sort of think, what on earth is Somerset Council doing, wanting to stick these advertising things on there? I mean, I think every roundabout may be a different case. There may be roundabouts in Taunton, for example, where similarly maybe there's a sort of biodiversity issue there or a visual amenity issue. Similarly, other ones it might work well. But I think in this instance, in this particular location, having looked at the photos and reviewed what Will said and what the local knowledge is, I'm in favour of refusal. I think it would take a lot to convince me otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any other councillors wishing to speak on this before so we've had a proposal to refuse from Councillor Mansell, seconded by Councillor Ellis. Can I see those in favour of a refusal, please? 2, 3, 4, 6, and we will of course need reasons to refuse it. Well, yes. Can I see those against refusal? Yeah, I think that's just me. Yeah, that appears to just two of us. Okay, so that's any abstentions? 1, 2, 2 abstentions, 3 abstentions, 2 abstentions. Sorry, 2 abstentions. Okay. Right. So your reasons for refusal, please. David.
Yeah, so I'm not that used to doing this, but let's give it a try, and hopefully I may get some help if needed. But I realise our decision must be on policy grounds, and I believe policy D3 from the adopted site allocations and development management plan 2016. Policy D3 does say that adverts will be permitted unless their siting does not minimise disharmony. There's a whole number of double negatives in there, but it does go. It is not in harmony, essentially, is what I would say with regard to the amenity aspects of the siting. And I believe if it helps, that National Planning Policy Framework and from the 2024 new version 141 similarly says advertisements should be subject to control in the interests of amenity and public safety. And my look at this, it's not in the interest of amenity. It makes the area look less pleasant and not as good, and has a potential biodiversity impact, which causes a problem.
Are you saying anything about highway safety? Because that's not supported by the highways officers. I'm just concerned about that.
We could do. As I said earlier, amenity for me seems the strongest thing, but I think there is a public safety issue here as well. If so, we could add that.
I think you misunderstood me, Dave. That the officers don't support the safety argument. The highways officers don't support a safety argument on this application. So, Zach.
Would it be possible for me to come in? Obviously, I hear the amenity argument. I would personally try and steer you away from a highway safety reason for a refusal on the basis that we don't have the support of ourselves as the highway authority. But I mean, hearing what you're saying, I mean, I would come up with a wording, something along the following lines: the proposed signage in this prominent siting would not be in harmony with the surrounding area and would thereby be harmful to the amenity of the countryside or whatever, the surrounding countryside, and is therefore contrary to policy D3 of the relevant plan and paragraph 141 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2024, which are material considerations in this instance. I'm being a complete technical planner here, but technically advertisements aren't development, so they don't fall, the development plan policy is of relevance as a material consideration only in this instance. So it's a bit of a technical point, but I would refer to them as material considerations, but we can still reference the policy and para 141 of the NPPF. We'll obviously word that in a slightly clearer way, but
as proposed. They appear to be happy with that. The normal routine would be to leave it to the lead officers and myself to come up with the appropriate wording. Again, are you happy with that along those lines? Yep. Okay. Both proposer and seconder are happy with that, Zach. So we'll go with that. Okay. Would somebody like to go and get Councillor Wren, please? We'll go on to item 7.
I'll stay for the discussion. I've got a quarter past.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go on to our last item of business today before we talk about the appeals decisions, of course. So it's item 7 in your paperwork, which is application 44/24/0021. And this is for the removal or variation of conditions. And it's the removal of condition number 2, which is the tourism occupancy condition of application 44/18/0012 at Holywell House, the Holloway, Wellington. And it's Denise Todd again is our presenting officer. So Denise, when you're ready, we'd love to hear your report.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is before committee as the views of the divisional member is contrary to the officer's recommendation, and the chairman has agreed for the planning committee to consider the application. So here we have the application site, which is outside of any defined settlement boundary and therefore within a countryside location. As identified by Core Strategy Policy D SP1. An unrestricted dwelling in this location would be contrary to policy SP1 of the site allocation. So I'll just make that clear. It's SP1 of the core strategy and SB1 of the site allocations and development management plan. As located in an unsustainable location, occupiers of the dwelling would be reliant on the private motor car to access day-to-day activities, as there are no facilities, amenities in the area. The holiday accommodation gained consent as ancillary use to the public house as a way to support the public house. Planning application 44/18/0012 separated the public house from the holiday unit by changing the wording of the holiday let occupancy condition. So the next few slides will show how the local planning authority has worked with the applicants to amend the wording of the holiday let accommodation. So here we can see the original wording, including bed and breakfast accommodation only in conjunction with the existing business at Holywell Inn. This was then amended to bed and breakfast accommodation and or holiday let only in conjunction with the existing business. Sorry, that was right. Then we've had the bed and breakfast reference as being removed, but staying in conjunction with the Holywell Inn. And then finally, we have the standard holiday occupancy condition as used throughout the council with the normal holiday applications. Now, by closing the public house, the applicant's income has suffered. However, as a standalone business opportunity, this holiday let has limited powers to generate income due to its scale of being one unit. It could not be expected to provide anything more than a supplementary income. It is considered that this has not been successfully demonstrated that no one, not just the applicants, but no one, could make the holiday let viable. A marketing exercise should have been submitted, and it is understood that the holiday unit was on the market for 9 months from September 2023 until approximately July 2024. It was then taken off the market following the sale of the public house, which was completed in November 2024, and this application was submitted in December 2024. I'm just highlighting an appeal decision that did, confirm that a marketing exercise should be undertaken. The recommendation is to refuse, as the proposal would result in an open market dwelling in an unsustainable location, resulting in the reliance on the private motor vehicle contrary to planning policies listed, with no wider benefit to the local community. There are the material considerations, and thank you, Chairman.
Okay, well, I've got a public speaker on this, which of course, as you realise by now, is the local member, Gore Wen. Sorry. My apologies. I have two speakers on this one. I didn't turn the page over. Rebecca, good afternoon to you and welcome. If you come to a microphone, my apologies. I didn't turn the page. When you're ready, push the right hand button, the red light comes on, and your 3 minutes begin when you begin speaking. And welcome to the committee.
Hello members, I'm Rebecca Randall. I'm not the agent for this application. I've been asked and agreed to come down and speak just based on my experience of similar applications in specifically the Taunton Deane area. I haven't read everything. It seems the issue is one of insufficient information. I know the officer quotes an appeal where the inspector says modelling would be, and marketing would be helpful. The agent for this planning application has found an appeal on policy DM2 which says that actually the policies aren't relevant to a change of use from a holiday let to a dwelling. I can tell you from bitter experience there are lots of appeals on policy DM2 and they are all equally inconsistent, so I won't put you through that this afternoon. But what I will say genuinely from my own professional experience is that in the area of Taunton Deane, when I've dealt with such applications, I haven't been asked for marketing before. I have been asked in other areas. Particularly, I've been asked in Sedgemoor District Council, which policy does say you need marketing and it does say you need it for 18 months. So I hope that there's no confusion there, because obviously we are clearly not a Sedgemoor site. What we do routinely get asked for is financial figures, and the applicant has provided years 2018 to 2024 from his accountant, who's a chartered accountant, bound by a code of conduct. Those are accurate figures. They do change year to year, as any business owner would know. When I've dealt with applications before, we've been able to get at least verbal comments from the economic development team, and that's really important. They haven't objected to the loss of small-scale tourist accommodation because they're working to the council's up-to-date economic development strategy, whereas the officer in the report is referring to supporting text in the core strategy when they talk about the importance of tourism in the area. That supporting text was written in 2012, and we're now in 2025. None of us need to be economists to realise that the tourism market has massively changed. So, in summary, it does give me no pleasure to say this, and it's only my professional opinion. I do feel like this application has been treated inconsistently compared to others that I professionally have been involved with. As I said, we haven't been asked for marketing. I think the evidence provided is accurate and it's proportionate to the request that's being made. And I would say, even if you didn't agree with any of that, I just can't see how the level of planning harm in changing from a holiday let to a house could be anything but minor. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I bring the ward member in, I will make a comment on something that Rebecca Randall has just said. I've sat on planning since 2005, and I've seen any number of these over those years. And in almost all of them, there has been reference to and provision of, on quite a number of occasions, the marketing information, normally from the local estate agent that was involved in the marketing. So I would take issue with what you said, having sat on a number of these over the years. So I think we're probably allowed to disagree with each other, but there we are. Will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was approached by the applicant here some time ago and asked to go and meet him to discuss or provide potential advice in relation to getting the holiday condition lifted. Since then, I've had various conversations with him, and I therefore am pretty much compromised in this particular aspect, which is why I'm now speaking and will leave the room after I've finished speaking. My initial comments to the planning application were that the property has been unsuccessful as a holiday let in recent years after COVID, and is now detached from the pub. The pub has reopened as a tea room, as I think you may have seen from the slides. Rather than have the owners use up a local dwelling house when the holiday let is underused, it seems more sensible to allow this large property to become residential. The officer response was that seems to suggest that the applicants would occupy Holywell House, and whilst this is used as their address on the application form, this is not referred to in the planning statement. As an open market dwelling, anyone can purchase the dwelling. Well, clearly, if it becomes open market, then it's fair game for anybody. It could, but equally, it could still be used as a holiday let. However, much of the officer's opposition seems to revolve around the question of sustainability, and I think we need to take note of the fact that the building is there. It is a residential building. It's in the middle of a hamlet. It may not be in the middle of a defined settlement, but it's had consent to be placed where it is, and it has been used earlier quite successfully as a holiday let, less so now. The question is people living it as their, would people living in it as their main residence be more unsustainable than a whole group of people coming in and out in terms of holiday lets, driving from London or whatever, possibly taking day trips? I don't know. I mean, it occurs to me that actually the difference between the two scenarios is pretty small, and therefore the harm to sustainability for allowing this change of use would be relatively small, which is why I'm here supporting the application. And I think that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. I will now take my leave from the meeting, if I may.
Of course, and thank you for your contribution today, as ever. And we will see you later in the week, I'm sure, at various meetings. Thank you. Audit on Thursday, if not before. Yes. Okay. Many thanks indeed. Zach, you wanted to come with something?
Yeah.
Oh right. Okay. Okay. Councillors, anybody wish to speak on this application? Derek?
Leave at 15:15, so I'm going to say something, express a defined view, and I'm going to leave before the votes, not because I don't know what I think, but I think it's only fair to sort of the balance view at this stage. Any application like this inevitably arouses suspicion in people's minds that, was this a situation where somebody built a house with permission for a holiday let, where they wouldn't have been allowed to build a residential dwelling with a plan to change it later? But the fact is that no matter what people speculate about that, that's not the application in front of us, and we all know that. So we have to consider it based on proper planning principles. And it seems to me, and given that I'm going to leave, I give the both views, there are two ways of looking at it, aren't there? On a strict application of the settlement boundary, this is not in a settlement boundary, and therefore it is defined as being open countryside, and therefore, on the face of it, it's not compatible with local policy. On the other hand, there is the reality here that this is a house which, as Gwilla said, is there, it's not going away, and it could, in principle, if it were more successful, though ironically, if it were, we wouldn't be having the application, be occupied by different people, and lots of them, every week of the year. There is a collection of houses. I went there this morning. I drove through the village this morning, the hamlet. You know, there is clearly a settlement there. It might not be a settlement as defined in our policy. You see the top of it, but obviously further south into there's a whole string of houses. So there are houses there. It's not as though it's out in open fields. That said, it's on the very edge of the settlement, and it's up a very quiet little lane with tight access. I struggle as to which way I would go on this if I was staying vote, because there's part of me that thinks, look, if you keep on building on the edge of settlements and allowing dwellings on the edge of settlements when they're not in the settlement boundaries, what's the point of having the boundary in the first place? Then there's a part of me that thinks, well, MPPF speaks of sustainable local communities, and if you want that little community to be sustainable, you want people to live in it and not just visit it on holiday. So on that note, I'm going to leave it.
Thank you, Derek. I think. Okay, Carol Ellis, please.
Thank you. Having listened to everything, I think on balance, I'm in favour of a change of use. So that's against the officer. That will be against the officer recommendation, correct? Just because, I mean, it's the obvious fact that if it, I mean, it is still marketed on country cottages. I did actually Google it to have a little looky, and it's very nice. So, you know, what's the difference? If it was very successful, as Gwyl said, you might have lots of different people throughout the year, but it would still be occupied. They would still be driving a car or whatever, or using a bicycle. So I'm struggling to see what the difference is, what the harm is, and just having a more settled, you know, a resident who might be able to contribute to the success of hamlet life. So I'm really struggling why we would refuse this. I don't think it would do any harm.
It's policy, and it's our policy. Now, if we are in the process of rewriting the local plan for the whole of Somerset, which will then be a pan-Somerset local plan, and whether this particular bit of the plan gets rewritten or not, I don't know, but it will certainly be looked at in the round. At the moment, it is our policy. Now, I'm quite happy to bring one of the officers in on this. I have to say that my own view is that it is against policy, and I could not support the change without changing our policy, which we may or may not do in the next. We have another 18 months, I think, to write the policy, because we have to do it as part of the change to a unitary council. We have to have a pan-Somerset plan, new local plan taking us to 2045, I think. So there we are. So that would be that. I hope is an attempt to answer your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, all the locals, I feel like the locals, they're not bothered about it switching to residential, because it could also, as part of that, it seems to be referenced here, that they could also occasionally use it. They could do it as a holiday let either. It's giving them flexibility, as I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong. All they're not worried about it being used as residential, the locals. They're just worried about any future commercial development. But I'm guessing that would need a separate planning application. If this was talking about building something new on the edge of a defined village with settlement limits, that would be another issue. But this is the building; it's already there, and there are people who, you know, notionally can already use it all the year round. So yeah, I would be inclined to say, yeah, go on.
Okay, Rosemary.
There we are. I would say making this non-tourism will be able to use by anybody, and I see that, you know, why can tourism be used by anybody? But I would say we need smaller accommodation in the district. We need small units, and this might be able to be split up into small units, and that's what we ought to be looking for, so that people can go to a property and actually have a smaller unit to look after. And that would be better if it was actually sustainable, so that they know that they don't lose it because they're not moving in and out of it all the time. Thank you.
Okay, any other councillors, Norman?
Have mixed feelings really about this one because an unsuitable location, unsustainable. I can hardly see that in a hamlet there. Whatever it is sort of a sustainable unit within that hamlet. What's the attraction about the tourism unit? Well, probably because it was with a pub, it helped its viability. Now, and especially in the present times, tourism has dropped substantially, as it has in our area, very substantially. So business does change from year to year. And if it's not viable, what are you going to do? Leave it as a derelict there? But if you can't get people in, because quite frankly, is he going to stay paying our council tax rates, or is he going to make it unoccupiable? I think really you're looking at something that times have moved on and we need to move on with them. So we need to be looking at policies here as to why this couldn't be made into a property on the open market, quite frankly.
I'll come back on the council tax. There's no discount for unoccupied properties any longer, so the council tax would be required on it.
If it is unoccupiable because it has no toilet or anything like that?
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, you know, if we're starting to talk about derelict buildings, yes.
Yeah.
That's another item. But if we want to change policy, that's fine. We can change policy. We are in a process where we are looking at the policies. But at the moment, the policies we've got are the policies that we should adhere to because they are our policies. If we want to change those policies, that's fine. There's a mechanism for that, and we are actually in the process of redoing the local plan. So there is a mechanism by which we can do this if that is the desire of the council members, not just of the planning committee, but the council generally. We are writing a new local plan. We are in the process of doing that. Hang on. Sorry, go on.
Could I just finish off then? Yeah. If that is the case, then in this situation, if we wanted more information on it, could we defer the decision on it whilst the requisite information for marketing, etc., is obtained?
The marketing information, I believe there was some marketing information was provided. I believe, is that right, Denise? There was some marketing information.
We didn't actually receive it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Chair, because it was for a period of 9 months and it ceased 6 months before the planning application was made. It had already been removed from the market.
I was sure I had read that it had been.
We've been offered it, but because it was like 6 months out of date, we declined it, and it had already been removed from market.
Then move on to the other councillors.
There's and also there's marketing and marketing. You could market anything at a ridiculous rate, and you're not going to get any interest. So it would have to be at a viable market, a sensible market rate. I don't know. It might well have been. I'm not saying it wasn't, but obviously we haven't seen that, so we can't take that into consideration in this application. I just if you will indulge me, Chairman, I just had sort of 3 very quick points, and I appreciate this is a difficult one, and I can sense there's some sort of differences of opinion in the room, and understandably. I suppose we come back to why was permission granted in the first instance for this building? This building was granted on the basis it would support the local economy, and it would support the pub, and you'll see that we have been flexible over time because it was originally as an ancillary accommodation to the pub. Then we've allowed it to be used for other purposes, and over time we have allowed different flexibility in that. What we're seeing now is an application saying, oh, we can't make it work. We can't make it work viably. And what we've seen in terms of the information that's been provided to us is that prior to the pub shutting, the owners only took a very small amount out of the business from the holiday let. They took a small amount. Once the pub had shut, obviously that income stream was lost to them, and they felt they needed to take more out of that. So I think like £12,000 a year out of the holiday let. Now, if your only business is one small holiday let and you're expecting to make a living out of it as an individual, then you're going to struggle. But that's not to say another company that runs holiday lets and like UK cottages or whatever couldn't make it work. And that's why we felt that the marketing information was insufficient. Obviously, it's open. I would recommend against deferring to allow for further marketing information, but certainly if the applicants went off and did that marketing and it was at a right rate and could demonstrate that they'd marketed it and there was still no interest, then a new application would be likely to be considered more favourably. The only other 2 points I'd make is there was a point from the member who spoke and has now left the chamber. He's saying there's no real difference in sustainability terms because obviously when you've got a holiday let, you've got people coming and going. I accept that, but the difference is that the holiday let really contributes to the local economy until people coming into Somerset, into that area and spending in the local economy. Obviously, there is some benefit from having a permanent person in the property, but our policies are geared towards encouraging local tourism, and as the chairman's quite rightly said, our policies are geared towards that. If we wanted to go against that, that's perfectly your right as the decision maker, but it would be contrary to our policy. We'd have to demonstrate the reasons we're going against our policies there. And the third question, and this, you might think I'm being naughty putting this, but if this was an application for a new dwelling in this location, and I don't think that we would be having this argument. I appreciate the building's there, but it's there as an existing business in a tourism business in the countryside that hasn't been demonstrated that it's not viable. As I said, if it can be demonstrated that it's not viable with genuine marketing information, then our position might be different. But at the moment, all we're seeing is we've tried to market it, so you should, but we didn't get any luck, so you should just give us a house where we wouldn't normally allow a new house in the countryside. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillors Mansell and then Farberhide, please.
Okay, thank you. I will say this one does present me with some dilemmas, and clearly I know the area and do know where the dwelling is and know a little bit of the history of the pub and some of what's gone, what's the issues there. But I do feel in a bit of a dilemma on it, and Zach has just made some points that were in my mind. I think possibly I should still say them, and I was sort of conscious that the holiday let was allowed partly to give another income source to help retain the pub. I'm aware of that, and that does seem an important factor that can't be entirely ignored, although clearly plan terms the two have been separated, but it was the reason that building was put there. Someone believed it could work as a holiday let and be profitable and contribute some income. So whether that is still possible or not, though, we do have to bear in mind, and absolutely I don't wish to create a situation where a building is not used. I really don't wish to take a decision which leads that way. I feel that that feels like a mistake to me. So I think we do need to be careful of what we decide on this one. My feeling was a bit like Norman said, that I don't feel I quite know enough, and the officers are telling us that they don't know enough, and that was causing me a bit of a problem. I was about to say what Zach has just said don't do, but maybe I raise it as a question because you didn't say why, Zach. I was wondering whether we should defer it to see whether more information could come in. So I'd be interested in why it's thought we shouldn't do that. I see though that it perhaps wouldn't be that different a step to resubmit with the information, and maybe that's the point. So but obviously I will wait for the answer. I'm a little bit conscious also, just finally, on what the policy says. and I think that's been referred to. And certainly the discussions referred to the fact that, okay, it's not working for this owner, and this owner was particularly looking at it in the context of the pub at one time, but there might be other holiday let people who could actually make this a goer and a runner, and it's just in the wrong ownership. So it needs to be sold to someone else who could make it a go. But if that's possible, and I don't know whether it is or it's not, but it seems it could be a possibility and something that perhaps should be tested given the circumstances. And if I've understood the policy correctly, there is a sequential test suggesting some of these other things should be tested. And one of them is whether it should be an affordable home. And I can't help but comment, again, being a member for the area, that there is demand for affordable housing within the area. Now, whether it would fully extend to Wellington without Holywell Lake here, I can't say for certain, but I've come across some really sad stories of local people who could not afford a local home, who wanted a 4-bedroom home, and there was just nothing they could afford. And this is a 4-bedroom home. You know, they're really rare in affordable terms in the area, and at various times have really been wanted. Now, whether this location fits or not, I don't know. So, but there we go.
Okay, but I'll make a comment on the sequential list. The changing it to a residential unit is the last thing on the list. So yes, we would need to see a sequential list of what's happened, so that could be assessed as to whether or not they fulfilled the terms of our policies. So yeah, I don't think personally, I don't think deferring it's the right answer, because I think if that information was available, a reapplication would make that information available to us. So I'm going to. Sorry, Zach, do you want to come back in? Yeah.
Well, only yeah, you've already answered from your perspective. I mean, I think the reason I said a deferral, I wouldn't recommend that, was mainly because what we're looking for is quite detailed marketing information that could be properly assessed, and I think you're talking at least several months there, and to defer an application indefinitely to come back at a later time, if it was just clarification on some of the information that had been submitted, then I think a deferral would be a good idea, because we could go and get that reasonably quickly and bring it back. But I think we're looking at something different there. And the only other point I'd make, and one of the councillors made a point, that there may be demand for smaller units in that area as well. But coming back to the thing planners always say to you, and has already been said today, we can only consider the application before us, and the application before us isn't to remove the condition and to enter into a section 106 to say that this property would be affordable. It's just to remove the condition. So we have no, whilst an affordable unit would be preferable sequentially, that's not what's before you at the moment. It may be that going away from this meeting, the applicants want to consider. I don't know if they got a refusal, but just to say we have to determine what's in front of us. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry.
Okay, and Councillor Farberhey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I look at it in a light that our rural areas actually could do with being more sustainable, and there's an existence of this unit within the sites, within the sort of rural areas, and I'm minded to support Councillors Mansell, Ellis, and Cavill on this. That I think you should be open-minded on that basis. So I like to sort of, if you're minded to defer it, I will support that. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll have to go with my colleagues and go against the office's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not trying to lead the committee, but I don't think a deferral is the right answer on this application, because as Zach has pointed out, we need to decide on the application that's in front of us, and that is to remove the tourism tie, not for anything else. And when you look at our planning considerations, the sequential test, the last one is to bring it into a residential property, ordinary residential property. So, okay, we're at a point now we've got to start making a decision. So, councillors, if you wish to go against the officer's recommendation, one of you needs to propose it with the appropriate wording. So, and you need to have a seconder, and then we'll vote on it. Otherwise, we'll just go round and round in circles. So, Stephen.
I had actually put my hand up to speak, Mr. Chairman, but
my apologies. I
don't
missed you.
worry
It's
about
normally
it at
Rosemary
all.
I missed.
And,
I shall
and
tell
normally
you.
I would try and help you with the proposal, but I don't know that I can just at the moment, and I'll explain why. Because I have considerable sympathy with the applicant, but I do see from the planning policy point of view that there are considerable difficulties for us just at the moment. Now, the Exmoor experience, as some of you around this table will know, is rather different to the rest of Somerset. Being an extremely deeply rural area, we try to make our communities as sustainable as possible. And one thing I will say for the future of our local plan is that just parroting it's an unsustainable location, I do not think for rural Somerset is going to be sufficient in the future. I think we have to say, what are we doing to make it sustainable? How are we going to make places like Holywell Lake sustainable? Now, it just happens that in this circumstance, if there was an active travel plan in place, for instance, Wellington is within easy cycling distance of where this is. It's almost within not that far walking distance, and the rate Wellington's going, it will soon be meeting it. So how much longer this will remain an unsustainable location, even under our current policies, remains to be seen. But that bit, unsustainable location, I think is a real problem for Somerset, and we do need to think deeply about that. Equally, on Exmoor at the moment, I will say that, and picking up Councillor Mansell's point, one of the things that we have is the facility to say that there can be a holiday let or an affordable condition on a particular property, and you can interchange, you can move from one to the other. But again, we're not there yet with that in the plan. Indeed not. So the problem I think we've got in some respects is that this application is premature for the plans it currently is. Now, one way that they could get over it is by proving that the business really is not economically viable. And I think if we had that before us today, the proof that the marketing has taken place demonstrably, it is not economically viable, I think we would have grounds in the plan for saying, okay, taking everything in the round, building is there, clearly is not viable as holiday accommodation anymore, we'll edge towards approving it. I think the problem that we've got as members, and I hear entirely what the applicant's representative has said, but we are stuck with not really having up-to-date, sufficient marketing information for us to be able to stick our neck out and say, that is sufficient for us to be able to overcome the other objections. That's the problem. And it saddens me to say it, because as I say, I've got some sympathy with the applicant. The building is there. It's got to be used for something. But I think if we're going to be able to go with change of use, we've got to have that marketing information that at least gives us the grounds for a bit of a case, which at the moment we don't quite have. That doesn't help you at all, Mr. Chairman, really. But those are my thoughts.
Well, it doesn't. In as much as I happen to agree with you, I think that is the nub of the issue that we have here. And what we have to be careful about is, whilst we are writing a new local plan, we haven't written it yet. It hasn't gone through its various iterations, let alone its examination in public before it becomes the local plan. So we have that issue, and if we are not careful, we could find ourselves setting a precedent and have an absolute plethora of applications for what we have previously considered to be unsuitable locations or open houses in the open countryside, which would be then incredibly difficult to resist. And I think that would open up a can of worms, which it would not, in my view, be a good idea to do. However, we are looking at an application that's in front of us today, and we need to do that. So if there is a will of the committee that they will go against the officer's recommendation, I do need to have sufficiently strong grounds to do so.
Mr. Chairman, I recognise all too well the sequential testing that needs to be done. So I think I'll withdraw any previous comments.
It is difficult. I know it's difficult, and being 18 months out from a new local plan is not a comfortable place to be, but that is where we are. And let's not forget that the local plan will be until 2045. So we're having to look into the future by 20 years or so, as to what we think it will all look like in 20 years' time. So I think we're at a difficult position, and I'm going to try and push it along a little bit. I am going to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse this application on the material grounds that have been put out. I don't know whether there's a seconder in the room. Thank you. Okay. Well, I wouldn't entirely disagree with that, Stephen. I wouldn't entirely disagree with that, but we are at a place where we are, and we've now, thank you for seconding the proposal. We now have to test that. So can I see those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please? I think that's two of us. Oh, look, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah, 5, Josh. And those against? 1, 2, 2, and abstentions? 1 abstention. Okay. So that item is refused, but I think the applicant can go away with a very clear idea of a direction of travel, and I hope that gives you some comfort. Might not be the comfort you wanted, but I hope it will bring you some comfort. And I don't doubt that this committee will see that application in a slightly different form reasonably soon. Okay, a last item on our agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is the appeals. So I'm going to turn over to Zach and ask Zach to run through the appeals with us quickly this month. They won't take very long. I'm happy to say we've been quite successful again, I'm pleased to say.
I'll be quick. So you'll see on pages 79 to 86, 87, it's a discussion and appeal for an application for permission in principle for 2 dwellings with electric charging points and upgrades to foul water system. This is Milverton Road, Runnington. The appeal was dismissed, and it's an interesting one because rather than assessing the planning merits per se of the appeal, the inspector came down to the conclusion that the impact on the Ramsar site in terms of phosphates and that not being mitigated meant that this was an environmental development, which meant that actually it shouldn't have been considered originally under the permission in principle process. So they would need to apply for full planning permission to do this. Now, they may well apply for full planning permission, but you may say it's a bit of a cop-out because the inspector's conclusion is basically Yeah, I would have to take into account the planning balance, the lack of a 5-year land supply, the fact this is proposing 2 dwellings and all of the other factors. But ultimately it comes down to the fact that it was the wrong process to consider something that actually is an environmental development. So quite an interesting one. And on that basis, it's no surprise the inspector threw out the appeal and also dismissed the costs award request. And I'm not at all surprised at that, but equally I wouldn't be surprised if a planning application came in now because the planning permission in principle route is no longer open to them. And then there's those the only decisions, and then we've got 2 appeals received. They're both householder ones. They're both, well, I mean, they're obviously important to the applicant, but both in the scheme of things fairly minor. One was for a dropped curb on Wordsworth Drive. But that was refused on highway safety because it would involve movements across the footway, and also the way they were proposing to park is completely parallel to the to the road, and so it would involve quite significant toings and froings to get into there, and blind spots, and so it was felt to be an unsafe location. So we'll wait for that one, but I'm fairly confident that given the objection from us as the Highway Authority and the Planning Authority, I'm pretty confident that that one will not be upheld. The other one was a more subjective one. It's for at 9 Brendan Road in Wellington for 2-storey extensions, front, side and rear. The officer was really focused on the front extension, which he felt was incongruous, harmful to the character and appearance of the street scene. So it's a balanced one because beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and as you know, there's an element of subjectivity with things like that, where it just comes down purely to a design issue. There were no impacts on highway safety, no impacts on neighbour amenity through overlooking or loss of light or anything like that. So we'll just await the outcome of that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where, because I think the officers and whoever signed it off, not myself, is trying to sort of focus in on the sort of principles of good design. Equally, you know, you get one inspector who says it's fine, one inspector who says it's not. So when it comes down to these subjective things, it's always more difficult to guess, second guess. But thank you. That's all I really had to say, unless there were any questions about any of those.
Okay.
3.
Councillors, any questions for Zach on any of the appeals or anything else for that matter? Andrew.
Just clarification on that last one. It wasn't refused on policy then, it was just a subjective.
Oh, it was refused on policy, but on a subjective assessment of policy, whether the visual harm was such that it was contrary to policy. But no, obviously there was a policy, development plan policy reason. Sorry,
It was a 2-storey wraparound extension, all the way round. I seem to remember it was a semi-detached house. So one half of the semi would have a front, side, and rear extension, 2 stories.
Many stately homes were built like that
Oh,
years ago.
Listen, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. I would struggle with the phrase stately home and Brendan Road, but that's me. That's me.
Now, I can't remember the number at this precise moment, but the thing has been hanging around since 2021, and I wondered, as we keep giving it to planning officers, could we decide it as bring it to committee and decide?
I can't give you an answer to that because, with all due respect, I don't know what you're talking about, other than that there is an application that's been hanging around for a very long time, 4 years from what you've said. If you want to send that to me.
Well, I've tried sending it to planning.
Well,
and I haven't
no,
had
try
any-
sending it to me, Rosemary.
Yeah.
All right, and I'll talk to Zach about it.
Yeah.
But until I see it and I know what it is we're talking about, I can't give you
Yeah, I'm
a proper
sorry.
answer. No,
I thought it was going to be on the committee. today because, but it's not been brought to committee today, so therefore it hasn't
Okay.
got as far as this. But
Well,
that
if you
my
said,
problem is I've been having terrible trouble with IT and it keeps bouncing around and keeping coming back to me. So I do try to get these things to the right person. I will
Okay.
get it to you.
if you get it to me, I'll look at it. I'll, you know, and I'll have a conversation with Zach at the same time. Okay? I mean, I don't know what the result of that conversation will be, but I don't know what the application is yet either.
But it's
So-
a check. Yeah, it's a change of use anyway. Yeah. It's been given planning permission once and then they changed their mind and decided the environment was going to get a hand in it.
One of my colleagues.
We'll look at it within the next day or so, and you'll get some sort of response from Zach and or I in the next couple of days.
Thank you.
Okay?
So you have had it. Yeah.
Well, apparently it's just been sent to Zach. One of his colleagues has just dug out the reference and sent it to him. So now we know what it is, we can look at it.
Thank
And when
you.
we've looked at it, we'll talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to formally close the meeting. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. Meeting's closed at 6.